In this course, we're going to create a number of different workflows. Some of them are workflows that will solve relatively complex business problems, or workflows that may run for a series of days or weeks or even months. And then we'll create some smaller workflows that run quickly, that maybe take us only a few minutes to create and a few more minutes to test. And then, of course, a few more minutes to document. And so we're going to create a number of different workflows, some fast and easy, some more complex, some that we will complete, some that we'll leave half finished because we'll have learned what we need to learn out of the first 5 minutes with the workflow. And we'll use different tools to create them. And so I'd like to describe the geography and the tools for our time together. Major workflows. First, employee onboarding. Any organization that hires new employees has to have a series of practices that they put in place to make sure that they're getting all of the forms filled out for the employee, but also to make sure that we've given that employee appropriate access to computer systems, an email account, perhaps an office, maybe some technology. Whatever the process is, it's probably a process that in the early days of the business was fairly informal, and as your business grows, it needs to be more and more formalized, so we make sure that we cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So this is the sequential series of actions that are related to new employees, employee onboarding. In the same way, we used to order business cards by picking up the phone, calling down to the HR department or the print shop and saying, "Hey, it's Joe, I need more cards." When there are only 25 employees, that's not a bad thing. But when there are 2,500 or 25,000, you need a process in place. And so this is the formalization of a process that allows an employee to order their own business cards, what's called employee self-service. In our organization, when we need a new position, we have to go through an approval process for that. A manager or a supervisor or even a vice president or a CEO will make a request. And then the person in charge of that department, whether that's a director or a vice president, has to approve it. But we also need approval from the chief financial officer and the director of the HR area. So this is an approval workflow that goes through multiple steps. In terms of our minor workflows, we're going to create a workflow that simply confirms to someone who submitted a document or a list item that it was submitted. So we're going to email them back and say, "We've got it, we're working with it." We might also do a calculation if that's appropriate and send them a date that we would have something finished on. Doesn't matter. The whole idea here is send an email. We're going to create an announcement from an item that was added to the calendar, and we won't do this automatically. Whenever a user enters something on the HR calendar, we'll give them the ability to say, "Yeah, I'd like that event put in the announcements list as well." So creating a list item from another list. Back in the day, we had file names in Windows and before that in DOS or the disk operating system that were constrained to 8 characters followed by a period and 3 more characters. Hard to believe when we're creating file names today like "my beautiful report I created on a winter day." But we used to have to just be able to describe in 8 characters that same idea. And because of that, many organizations created maps for how they were using file names. If you were saving a group of policies, for example, the first 2 digits might have been the policy's prefix. The next 2 might have been the policy area or department. When we only had 8 characters to use, we were making sure that every one of them had meaning because that's how we were storing our metadata. We still have file names like that. Even when users were told that they could use 256 characters in a file name, there were still lots of reasons to say, actually, we want to constrain that file name because we still had no place to put metadata. So we were still mapping. If you have a library full of policies, documents, timesheets, whatever they are, where you've used that kind of a practice, we can extract metadata from those file names and put it in columns, which is the appropriate thing to do in SharePoint. We're going to create a minor workflow that allows us to process credit card transactions. This will pop up a couple of times in the course. We'll look at it early and a little later on in another version, and we really wouldn't be creating this kind of a workflow. This is the kind of thing that you have to buy insurance and fill out many, many forms to prove that you are appropriately protecting each and every transaction. And so today, most folks who want to process transactions aren't going to create their own workflow. They're going to purchase some kind of a service that is going to do this, even if it's just a square that you plug into your iPhone. But it makes a great practice for us to learn something about how we work with choices. We're going to create a workflow that's a site workflow, available throughout the site, not tied to any list or library, to be able to quickly grab suggestions and feedback from users. And we're going to create a workflow that authorizes a payroll that includes hours greater than 40 for an employee. Those are our major and minor workflows, and a few others along the way that don't merit discussion or conversation here. What tools will we use? Well, the first tool we'll use, and we'll use it only briefly, is Internet Explorer to be able to create a workflow using the built-in workflows in SharePoint. We don't even need SharePoint Designer to create workflows like the 3-state workflow that we'll see shortly. But we're going to download and install SharePoint Designer 2013. This is the SharePoint Designer Essential Training course, and this is our workhorse. SharePoint Designer has 2 different interfaces, or 2 different designers built in. SharePoint Designer is a free tool, and the text-based designer inside of it is the free version of SharePoint Designer, is one way to think about it, because all you need is your SharePoint site and SharePoint Designer, and you'd need a browser to be able to check things out. So this is our development environment for most of this course. However, there's also a visual designer that's available in SharePoint Designer 2013. The reason that this isn't what we spend most of the course working with is it's only enabled if you have Visio Professional installed on the same machine that you have SharePoint Designer installed on. SharePoint Designer is free. Visio Professional, I promise you, is not. And so for many of us, if we want to be able to quickly jump in and start learning how to create workflows, saying, please spend hundreds of dollars and buy me one more piece of software so I can do this visually, is a pretty high bar in many of our organizations. But if you have Visio Professional, not only can you use the visual designer in SharePoint Designer, but you can also create workflows right in Visio. You can't really finalize them there. Visio does not have a way to publish these back to your SharePoint site, and there are many settings and specific options in commands that Visio cannot provide. However, we can begin creating our workflow in Visio Professional, and then we can open it up in SharePoint Designer and further customize it using either the text-based designer or obviously the visual designer, because if we have Visio on our machine, then we must be able to use the visual designer. It's possible, though, that you have someone in your organization, a business analyst, for example, who can use Visio to create the workflow that you need to work with. You don't have Visio, but you can still open it and use it in the text-based designer. So these are our workflow development tools that we will be using in this course, and the minor and major workflows that we will be creating together. I'm looking forward to our time together. Let's get started. We have a lot of things to design.